I'm also at the end going to tell you a little bit about the project that we just started up this summer. And we're studying California ground squirrels out over in the East Bay. And so this is in Briones Regional Park. And we're setting forward the different components to be able to test these same kinds of questions in these California ground squirrels, which are also social and living in big groups. So the general question is, do free-living mammals bias affiliative, so friendly behavior, maybe that cookie, sharing it, doing something nice? Do they bias affiliative behavior directed towards their genetic relatives? And on the other hand, do they fail to direct harmful behavior towards relatives? So if this theory is correct, not only should I be helpful to my genetic relatives, but I should also refrain from targeting them in aggression. So I'm going to ask that question in spotted hyenas, and then I'm going to ask it again in yellow-bellied marmots. So my general approach is to hit it again and again and again and see how robust the evolutionary theory is. Okay? So I'm going to start off with some hyenas. And for the hyenas, all of this work is with my mentor, Kay Hull-Camp, who is actually Scott Noon's PhD advisor as well, so small world. And we're back to squirrels. Her PhD was actually on squirrels too. So, but now she's been working on hyenas for 25 years. And I was involved in collecting data on this long-term project. And these hyenas live in these large social groups. They're more complex than any other carnivore. They have 80 to 100 individuals. And importantly for this question, these individuals can be genetic relatives and non-kin, defined as level of relatedness of about 0. Okay? So they're very complex groups with different levels of relatedness amongst the different members. Individuals comprise within the social group, which we call a clan. So these clans are very dynamic. And what's really interesting as well, and fairly unique except for in lemurs, is they have female dominance. And that means that one individual female can outcompete an adult male in any fight. Okay? So that's really interesting for thinking about cooperation and who wields the power in these societies. So I tend to focus on the females for these types of questions because when it comes to social allies, they're the most important. So here's just to give you a graphic for thinking about these spotted hyena societies. Each matriline or family group has a mom, her offspring, her grand offspring, and so forth. So there are multiple family groups within this clan or society of hyenas. So we call these a matriline because it's based on the mom. And each matriline can be ranked in a linear dominance hierarchy. What do I mean by that? Well, we can take animals in this family group and we can give them a dominance rank order. So bracket shoulder here, she's the alpha female. She's socially dominant to every other individual here. So if they line up to feed, they've just killed a gnu about this big, they come in to feed, bracket shoulder has first dibs, whereas individuals that are way down here have lower feeding priority. And even if they've made the kill, they have to sit on the sidelines. Okay? And also, what's important here is that all of the adult females stay at home. So they're philopatric, which is a pretty common scenario for mammals. So they're staying at home. They have many opportunities across their whole lives to cooperate with each other. So those are the females. Where are the adult males? Any guesses? Well, turns out they have to leave home to mate. And when they come in all the way at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy. Okay, so they immigrate way down here at the bottom. And all of these females are socially dominant to the males. So from here, I'm going to focus on these adult females and the way they cooperate with each other because they're the ones that everyone's sucking up to, so to speak, to form social alliances with. They wield a lot more power. Okay, so we use a variety of tools, including the tools of social networking. So who's heard of Facebook? When I first started going around, people were, what's Facebook? Yeah. What's social networking? So the hyenas do this too. Their social networks are based on, they live in these fission-fusion societies where they split apart, they come back together. So I might walk up to you, I'm initiating a friendly behavior, we're fusing together, and then I'll break apart and spend less time with you and maybe join up with someone else. And so we can actually form the connections here. These are their friends and the links of these social networks. Each one of these individual circles represents an individual hyena. And each one of these colors represents their family membership. So here's the alpha matriline, much bigger than, say, family group number 7. And you can see they also have more social connections than do the lower ranked individuals. And so the thickness of these lines are important, and having that social interaction at all is important. And the question we asked here, so given that there are family members, there are unrelated individuals, and kin typically associate more often than non-kin, so they're spending more time in physical proximity, how stable is this? So feeding competition is enormously important in hyena social groups. So we'll get to this, I'll show you a picture so you can see this firsthand. We wanted to know how stable these social alliances are across different periods of prey abundance. So when prey are pretty sparse, the hyenas are generally less social. And if you compare when they're less social, we wanted to know how stable these are across time. And it turns out that everyone becomes more gregarious, spending more time together when there's a lot of food, so high prey. And then they go back to low prey, they're spending less time together because competition is a disruptive force. So not enough cookies here, I'm gonna go find some more, right? So what's interesting though is you can see these clusters of kin, these family groups, are still maintained across these different periods of ecological stressors. So that's really interesting, I think. So given that we know that maternal relatedness is really important in these groups, but in an earlier study, Sophie Wahaj, another graduate student in this lab, she wanted to know whether maternal and paternal kinship mattered for thinking about cooperation. And one really important way that hyenas cooperate is they join forces. So these two hyenas stand next to each other, they join forces, and they direct coalitionary aggression towards a single target. And we wanted to know whether maternal and paternal relationships drove these patterns of cooperation. It's potentially costly, these two individuals could get hurt, they take time out from other activities, and so forth. And what's interesting here is you can also see these are subadult hyenas, and they're actually able to be socially dominant to this older animal. Okay, we can talk about that in questions later. Okay, so here's what she found. And as predicted by kin selection theory, that both maternal and paternal kinship matter, full sib litter mates, so they had the same mom and the same dad, they formed coalitions the greatest hourly rate. And this was more often than did maternal half-sibs or paternal half-sibs, okay, and significantly so. And then if we take this a step further and just think, okay, is it actually maternal relatedness, paternal relatedness versus non-related individuals, non-kin formed coalitions cooperating to the lowest extent. So this suggests that both maternal and paternal kinship is important, and that hyenas are figuring this out, okay? So we know that this is true for these young individuals, these cubs. I wanted to then ask, well, what happens when you have these adult females in these situations where you have two hyenas, this hyena B and hyena C. They're really going at it with each other. They're fighting, they're duking it out, and this other hyena, hyena A, is standing there. And she has the opportunity to either just sit back and not intervene, or she can come in and provide coalitionary support to hyena B. By her doing so, she is increasing the chances that hyena B will win this fight, okay? But she's potentially paying a cost herself by being engaged in this. So we basically tested a couple of different hypotheses. And so the first is through kin selection, A may gain inclusive fitness benefits from helping B. So A helps B, and A and B are genetic relatives. It's also possible that A helps B now, B helps A later, so there's this time delay. I help you now, you help me later, and we're not related at all. So it's just some sort of reciprocal altruism. And we actually found absolutely no evidence for that one, so I'm just going to rule that out and move on to the other ones, which we did find support for. And the final hypothesis is that A gains direct benefits from helping B. So there's no time delay. I help you now, and I get something out of it, actually. So that I'm directly benefiting from that helpful act. You're being helped, but I'm getting something out of being so nice and helpful. Okay? And so we actually found support for both the kin selection and direct benefits hypotheses. And how did we do that? Well, I lived in a tent for a year in Kenya and did all of that and darted hyenas from a truck, and here's a hyena that's asleep, and we just straightforwardly get her blood, and then we extract DNA from the blood and do some genotyping, and years later we have a nice paper. No, it's actually, anyway, so it's a lot of work going into this, but the power of being able to have this complete data set is really interesting, I think. So we assign close kin, so we know which females are mothers and daughters, and we also know full sisters. So individuals that have the same mom and the same dad. Now dads are coming in, they're leaving. Dads are not spending very much time in the clan, so we actually have a lot of sisters that have different fathers. And so we also have half-sisters, aunts, nieces, grandmothers, granddaughters that are less related to each other. And then finally we have these non-kin that based on genetic relatedness we're actually able to exclude as being genetic relatives of each other. So how do these coefficients of relatedness predict this social behavior? Okay, so there's actually, these coalitions are very complex in the way that they form. They're context dependent. Hyenas are typically, so this is support of a beneficiary per opportunity. Two animals are fighting. I have the opportunity to join. Given that I have the opportunity to help, do I provide support to a beneficiary? If I do, it's typically that I'm helping individuals that are socially subordinate to myself. So very rarely am I actually helping individuals that are higher ranking than myself. This also varies whether food is currently available or not. And I'll explain that a little bit in detail later, but what I want you to focus on first is these genetic relationships. So if you focus on just this category, you can see non-kin are here in white, gray, distant kin, and close kin. And across each of these categories, there's an increasing tendency to provide coalitionary support to be helpful when individuals are more closely related to each other. And this includes both maternal and paternal kinship. So this is consistent with our kin selection theory because hyenas are helping their genetic relatives in these fights. Okay? So that's one part of the story. So relatedness matters, and they're doing this based on this patterning. We can look at this in more detail and understand the degree to which full siblings versus half-sibs are important. And we actually found, even though it's a fairly small data set, we're able to compare siblings. Full siblings cooperated more often than did half-siblings. Okay? So they're able to distinguish between who the parents might have been. And maternal half-sisters and paternal half-siblings, they generally cooperated to similar extent. So this is, again, consistent with that theory. Okay. So Hamilton's rule often, people just usually focus on, I'm going to think about relatedness, think about kinship, and that's the only part. But he actually states that the costs and the benefits are really important. And usually people just kind of focus on that one part, but we wanted to look at how the costs are changing dynamically over time. Are the hyenas able to distinguish between situations where it's more or less costly and change their behavior? And that's where food comes in. Food is really, really important, and it turns out that in these non-food related conflicts, hyenas are much more helpful. They're significantly less likely to help you out if there's food on the table. Okay, so that when there's food, is available. They're not really helping anyone. They're very rarely helping non-kin or distant kin, and sometimes they're helping close kin, but usually in these competitive feeding situations, not very helpful. So they're modifying their behavior based on this cost. And here's that picture I promised you. So here's the feeding competition in these hyenas, and it's intense. It's really, really intense. So hyenas will hunt about 80% of their own food. When they do so, they typically remove themselves from the group and hunt by themselves, because once they come and get basically in a situation like this with lots of individuals, each of which has their own social rank, it's really costly to take time out from feeding. So they can consume 1.5 kilograms per minute, meat and bone, really fast. So this is extremely costly, so they're doing this less often when it's really costly. So this again is consistent with the kin selection hypothesis. Okay. That's not the end of the story. So hyenas are even more complicated. So they're actually, not only are they modulating their tendency to provide support based on whether food is around, there's another cost that might be involved. And they're in these societies, these fission fusion societies, so who is immediately available in a subgroup changes over time. So sometimes hyena A can provide support to B when they're just by themselves. Sometimes there are a lot of dominant, high-ranking individuals in the audience. And we predicted that hyenas should be less likely to provide coalitionary support when there are a whole bunch of hyenas in the audience that could potentially counterattack them for doing so. And it turns out that this is in fact true. So the hyenas are less likely to provide support for distant kin and non-kin when there are a high number of high-ranking bystanders in the audience. So